We're delighted to be here today for CDR Live. I'm Nancy Parsons, CEO and co-founder of CDR Companies, and I have two dynamic, exciting guests that I'm just thrilled to have with me. And they're actually advisory board members of our company, so that just makes it even more special. And I have Angie Westbrock with me and Angela Parsons. So again, welcome. We're glad that you're with us. And what I'd like to do is just start with having them introduce themselves. They've got amazing backgrounds in leadership, running businesses. So I'll start with you, Angie, if you would just tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So I'm currently the CEO of a company called Standard AI. That's a retail technology company supplying a new data layer to retail and brands and physical stores that is replicating the metrics that were once only available online. I've been here almost 4 years, but I started my career in leadership right out of college and went into CPG manufacturing, brewing. I've known Nancy a long time. She knew me back then as well. And, one of the things that I am so grateful for at starting with those big companies like Anheuser-Busch, Sara Lee, was an emphasis on coaching and development and how much that has informed my leadership over the last 20 plus years now. And it really made me value it at an early part in my career where now I understand, how important it is to invest in development of our teams, self-awareness, coaching, all super important for high functioning teams, whether you're, a very mature Fortune 500 company or whether you're an early stage startup like the one I'm in now. So happy to be here.
Great. Glad to have you. And Angela Spadaro, we have Parsons listed, but...
Well, hi, everyone. So yes, my name is Angela Spadaro, formerly Parsons, but I am a partner at Xelerate LLC. We are a company that does what's called recruitment process outsourcing. So we go into companies, usually, 5,000 plus employees that have large scale recruiting projects, mostly in healthcare and technology. And we supplement their recruiting team, or we act as the recruiting team to hire anything from 10 to thousands of people, depending on what they need. But we bring the people, the process, the tools to, again, build out the team and, fuel their growth the way that they need to. Right now, there's not a ton of growth happening. So we're really going in and top grading for a lot of organizations, which is really critical in, downturns in the economy. So happy to be on the board and happy to be here today.
Great. Well, thank you both. And I guess what we can start with is maybe you could each kind of talk about how you see the role as part of our advisory board, kind of explain for people, because not all firms have an advisory board, and we're just thrilled to have you. So I'd like to have you each kind of talk about, how you help us, the guidance you give, that kind of thing. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Great.
Yeah. I'm happy to start there. And I think it's interesting, Angie is with a smaller company now, but definitely has that big corporate experience from her past. And I have had corporate experience, but not as extensive as her, and have helped a small business grow from, 4 employees to 70 employees and facilitate that growth myself. But it's interesting, especially also, in the recruiting world, to be on this advisory board and understand, not only what it takes to recruit and vet the right talent, but also to then facilitate the retention through coaching, through development. And so I think between Angie and I, and also another board member that's not here, we bring a lot of insights and perspectives that, Nancy and her team internally at CDR might not be aware of. We're talking and out in the market in different ways. And so I think our perspective helps guide them from a marketing perspective, a sales directional perspective, all types of things for the business.
Yes. Great. No, it's terrific. And Angie, your thoughts?
What I would say is, for me, especially, I think it's really you showcasing the beauty of self-awareness and also wanting to surround yourself with people that you can get feedback from and that you also trust, which is really important as someone running a company, as a CEO. And of course, many of us have a board of directors, and that's made up. And that's one relationship that's also very important. But I really love the fact that you've created this advisory board with diverse backgrounds for very specific reasons that help to bring in a new voice to the table as you're in creating new products. And, I think my acknowledgement is especially the shift to how you're moving to digital coaching, which is this, completely new application of your technology and all of this, the awesome evaluations and coaching that you've built over the year, and bringing it to market in a different way, and acknowledging and saying, hey, I could use some more voices at the table while I'm doing this. And that's something that I replicate. I think is super important. I also do the same thing. I have several people in my circle that I consider advisory members that are, maybe have a vested interest in how we're doing, but most importantly, bring a diverse perspective to the table. That's really what we see ourselves doing.
Yeah. And you're also different in your backgrounds. I mean, there's some similarities, but, Angela's been obviously heavy in sales and business development, and you've had the, general management from COO, now CEO of the tech company. And of course, Katie Moore, who's not with us, she's heavy operations kind of, so it's wonderful to hear your insights, and you're in touch with technology, the technology worlds and all that. So it's really, I love hearing the viewpoints. And like you said, I trust you all so much. You'll tell me the truth straight up, no sugarcoating. Here it is. And then we go from there. But that's what you need. If I can't respond to that and think about it and look at it in different ways, then I don't belong here. I mean, it's that important to be able to be open to brilliant minds like yours. So thank you. I appreciate it.
And I think we also each represent like a different kind of target customer or, corporation that you might be targeting. So we also can kind of bring that customer voice to the table too, which I think is super important when you're creating products.
Right. So great. So one thing I did want to go back to, because you've also at one point in your life or another have been involved, or in your business life, with CDR yourselves before this role. Like Angela goes way back to her college days. Interesting story when you took the assessments. Of course, it was live coaching feedback I think you had with my business partner, Kim Leverage. And Angela, you might tell your story. It's a story I even repeat of how profound those results versus your going into your master's degree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you remember the story a little bit differently than is actually the truth, but I'll still tell it. So in the cases, I've always been in sales even before. So I was in a very, very bad accident. And that is what influenced me having a real inquisitiveness toward, and actually a real sense of unfairness with the healthcare system. And I wanted to go back and go through and get a medical degree, or at least a health related degree. And so I got a degree in occupational therapy, thinking that I did want to experience from a clinical perspective what would happen, but I could also really get into the business of healthcare. So that was the end game. But the clinical side, the assessments were absolutely right that was not at all aligned with who I am. And so if my end goal was to be a clinician, that would have been a absolute stellar tool to say, no, take a different approach. And ultimately now, I mean, I'm very, very glad I have a clinical degree because of what I do and the fact that we work in healthcare almost explicitly. However, again, if I were a younger person, or again, at a person very early on in my career where I was really looking to what path I wanted to take more concretely, the assessment is fabulous to really deter you and also guide you to where your strengths and where, again, your natural inclinations, lie. So that's good.
Yeah. I just do remember, though, at one point you called and said, those assessments were right. I'm not clinical.
Well, yes. And again, so this was for my master's. My undergrad is absolutely not in anything medical or healthcare. I have an undergrad in economics. But I wanted to, again, even though to get through and have that clinical credibility was a real tough road to hoe for me, because I just can't stand doing that type of, like, my brain isn't wired that way. And that's exactly what the assessment is so fabulous at identifying.
Yeah. No, that was
great. And it's validating in that way too, right? Because when you're going through it and it's intentional, and, I went to school for chemical engineering, kind of similar, did not enjoy it. And you start to really question yourself. And then you say, well, yeah, I learned some great skills here though. And it's a good degree to have, but I'm going to apply it in a different way, because if I put myself in a lab and I'm alone all day, I will drive everyone around me crazy. it will not be.
You'd be miserable.
Yeah. And I think, what's so great about the tool, and especially as the tool becomes more accessible through scalability with technology and through the avatar CDRU, is so many people, no one's going to change their spots, so to speak, but to be aware of it, you're just going to bring a lot more satisfaction in the jobs you take and the job you're doing. You're going to have a lot more guidance. Again, as a retention tool, I see it on the opposite side. As a partner in my business, I'm not the CEO, but I'm a partner, and there's only two of us that really run everybody. They're constantly craving that development.
Right.
And again, development doesn't necessarily mean developing and getting, a promotion into another job. It's developing within that role. Absolutely. And especially if you're the type of business that doesn't have a lot of succession going on and doesn't have a lot of career mapping that takes you into those promotional states, the tool is so fabulous to give that extra fulfillment that's not compensation. Again, a lot of my employees aren't just seeking X amount more a year. They're seeking this professional development that something like CDRU would provide, and to provide affordably compared to, again, the yesteryear of leadership development was exclusive to the C-suite, honestly, at corporations that could afford it. And it was also, almost seen as, such a luxury and not as a necessity.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. It's amazing. The other thing I like too, with all the individual coaching, even with CDRU coach, with the digital coach, one other thing that I find with executives to entry level even is that the one part of it is the drivers. So like you said, Angela, it's not about necessarily moving to another job, but it's, am I doing things inside and outside of work that make me happy? So it helps build that retention of, hey, this is exciting. I like this work and I'm really good at it. I'm having fun with it. And sometimes people ignore that, what gives them satisfaction, and it helps them kind of get back in touch with that. What brings them joy. So I think it helps there too, from a retention standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And and again, I look at it from the buyer side of a tool like this, where the employee, again, they get all those benefits, but from a buyer side, it's such an easy approach to retention versus, again, from a P&L perspective, just adding, giving everybody a raise, looking for
right.
Career mapping. It really is so user friendly in that regard, and so the ROI is huge.
Great. No, I agree. And the other thing about it is the results stay constant over time, so you don't need to retest. It's like if you're giving a raise, you're recurring that expense all the time, right? With a CDRU coach, it's a one-time expense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also, to think about, again, the tool's adaptable to different economic climates and different scenarios. And I think right now, when you think about, there's not a ton of growth. There, the Great Resignation has kind of came and went a little bit, and a lot of people are top grading internally or top grading, again, positions versus new growth, new W-2s. And so, as a tool to identify, again, internal succession, as a tool to top grade, it's really fabulous in that way. And especially, now is the time, we say from a recruiting perspective, to take your time, and you might be spending more on it as a cost per hire on recruiting, but you're really getting the best people, where you're not recruiting for desperation. That was the case in 2021, 2022, at least in healthcare. It was like, give me a body. Now it's give me the right person with the right alignment to fill the role.
Right. And we still, of course, help many clients. I was just involved with a group yesterday on selection screening, for a key position, to get the right person in upfront. And I know, Angie, you've had a lot of experience over the years at different companies with us now.
Yes, I bring you everywhere I go. Because my experience with it was also quite profound. I think there's a couple of things that you said that are super important, which the first one is, this was the first assessment that I've done that was non-judgmental, meaning it gives you your risks and your drivers and, areas of focus, but not in a way to suggest whether those things are good or bad. Right. And so instead of getting this list of things that you need to go work on and try to change about yourself, that's something that you just said that I think was really important, which is this doesn't change. I mean, you have, people that have taken it 20 years apart, and it gives you very, consistent results. And what that means is that, understanding intrinsically, or what's happening inside of you, is very different than how you're showing up and, as a leader, but it certainly informs it and makes you much better at making adjustments to show up in the way that you want to.
Right.
And I think, for me, I remember the first time I took the assessment was at Lyft, and I was VP of Global Operations. And, I've been in operations my whole career. And you said, you're not an operator. And I was like, shh, don't tell anyone. But yes, that really makes a lot of sense, because all of these things, I like leading operators. I don't necessarily like being an operator.
Right.
You profile like a CEO, and then now, here I am. And I do think part of that is giving you confidence in those abilities that you do have, especially as, we know from diversity initiatives and things like that, that women in particular tend to not lean into those, the strengths. We tend to shy away from those or emphasize the areas that we have less experience in. And similarly to your, the STEM evaluation that you can do for college students, where I think it gives you this ability to look at your skill set and not just look at areas where you say, okay, that is a risk for me and I need to really work to reduce my environment or triggers that put me into that risk mode for these reasons, but also where are the areas that I'm not really leaning into or bringing to the table that I actually really excel at.
Yeah.
And so that is really great for personal development. But then the reason I've been such a supporter and I love it so much is because then when you do that with your team, and once again, because it's non-judgmental, you can share your results in a really non-threatening way. And suddenly you have this language when you're working through conflict or hard times, where when you're talking with each other, you can also know each other's risks and say like, hey, I'm seeing something here that I know where it's coming from. Let's talk about it in a way and figure out how to work through this together. And that has been absolutely game changing in terms of leadership dynamics and how we work with one another.
Right. No, it's great, because you recognize if someone's going silent, say, for example, and that's not their, that's their risk, one of their risk, avoiding conflict, then they're stressed, something's bothering them. So you can say, pull them out, right? And say, hey, can we think about this another way? Or what questions do you have? What concerns do you have? But normally what happens is when you don't know this about each other, everybody kind of goes to their own corner if they tend to avoid conflict. And most people with technical backgrounds, like in your company and companies past, or, engineering types, technical types, they avoid conflict. Their highest risk is detached, followed by cynic. So they shut down when they need each other most, but they don't realize it. The problem is, without going through this, we just don't intuitively know this. It's just our normal coping behavior,
To that point, I think it's a really exceptional tool that's in place. Again, my husband is in sports with the Philadelphia Eagles, and it's like, a win can erase a lot of errors, but, in times of losses and in times of adversity is when, you really find out who you are, who your teammates are, and how they are as teammates to each other. And I think that what's so great about the tool is and to put it in, some pretty layman's terms, it can really preempt a lot of unnecessary drama that you might have when you understand that this person is not doing this against me, they're doing it for them. And it's the intent. It takes the intent is, yes, they want to get better with this. They're just coming at it from a different way versus, again, getting truly, dramatic with taking things personally. It's like, no, again, I'm a person that, one of the things that I have to constantly work on is taking a breath, because I move very fast, and saying, good morning, how was your weekend? Like those kind of things, because I want to get right into it. And it doesn't mean I don't love the person and really care about their weekend. It's just in this moment on Monday morning, this is what's on my mind. And it is absolutely no, anything against the person I'm talking about. And especially, again, in times of adversity or high stress, as your assessments will reveal, you can operate out of your risks by default. And just to understand that, hey, Angie's risk might be X, and I know we're in a time of high stress and adversity. I'm not going to read this reaction, this email wrong because I'm aware of this and I'm going to give her grace, so to speak.
Good. No, that's right. And even like I had a brief call with you this morning. You had so many things to get done. That was a perfect.
I know.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Yes. And when Angela Parsons is acting abrupt, it doesn't mean she's upset with anybody. It means she's doing 16 things.
I know you've got so many things going on. So I'm like, okay, we'll talk about it.
Yeah. But it's not against you or not that it's just like, okay, can we get to the point? Yes.
Yeah. And even talking about the risks, I know you both know this, but I'm really excited because we're coming out with an ebook. It'll be out June 2nd, I believe, formally on all the risks. And it's going to go into, it has chapters on what they are, each of the 11 risks, how they show up, case studies, executives, leaders we've coached, even some team insights from the different risks. There'll be 360 feedback, as well as developmental suggestions, like about 2 pages of developmental tactics for people who have those risks. So what do I do to prevent them from undermining my team, my relationships with others? So I'm really excited, and we're offering it free. This is like about 127 pages of really impactful stuff, and people will be able to access it on our website. So, and here's the thing, ideally you want to go through the assessment because then because you will have some surprises on your risks. Like, for example, one of my highest risks, of course, is upstager. No shock there. But the other one that's equal is detached. Hello, Angie, would you see me as detached?
No. I wouldn't know that intuitively. Yeah.
No, but it's not the frequency, right? But when I get my feelings hurt or this or that, or I'm overwhelmed with a lot of work pressure, I shut down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think again, like, people can make assumptions about somebody's risks and be wildly inaccurate. And so as a tool for a leadership group, or even not a leader, just middle management, or even, beginner group, it just be really, again, it cuts to the quick without all the guesswork and everything like that. And you can go through, and that's, again, I know the tool and the impetus for creating the assessment as a preface to any sort of coaching is brilliant, because, just doing coaching, it's like the therapist, no offense, that take 3 years and then they finally identify the problem. No, let's start from the problem and then, work toward a solution.
Exactly. And that's what I love about coaching with our tool. Like you say, up front from our first coaching session, we know where we're going because we've got this roadmap of who this person is. So for me, and I have a sense of urgency, like Angela, maybe not exactly the same as Angie. So as a coach, I don't want to hold someone's hand for months and months just getting to know them. I've got lots to do. So for me, if we can be impactful from that first session, sometimes, and what happens is that I think it goes both ways. So a lot of our coaching relationships don't last as long as people say, oh, you have to have 6 months of coaching. No, you don't. Maybe you need 4 sessions and you're done. It depends on you. It depends on where you're at. And some people take the data and they can run. They're good. You know what I mean?
What I was going to highlight too, Nancy, is what I think, and I'll kind of reference what I had said a little bit earlier, but what's also incredibly impactful is when you do this across your teams. So we kind of emphasized understanding that some people's risks are different than your own, but the other question is, what if they're all the same?
There you go. Oh,
yeah. A really powerful example. And this was where I remember one of the first times we did this across one of my leadership teams, and our profiles were all, several of us had identical profiles.
Right.
And what's funny is, that like, it really taught me, one, to understand some of the dynamics that were happening with leadership decisions, meaning you can fall into this really unhealthy pattern of, well, the majority of us think this is true, so that must mean that it's the right direction. Well, not if you're all just the same exact personality. It's just the same exact opinion, right? And one of the really interesting moments that I had is there was a colleague of mine that used to be the person who I'd always call for, like, my phone a friend and double check if I'm going too fast or too bold, because I tend to do that. And he would always give me the green light. And then I looked, and he was even like less like more willing to take a risk than I am. And I was like, oh, I'm calling the wrong person.
That's right.
He's never going to say no to me. He's always going to say, go for it. What
Exactly.
I needed to do is I had another person on my team who was much more, analytical and less risk taking. And I said, okay, that's my phone a friend now. When I really want to pressure check whether I'm doing something right, if I really just want somebody to commiserate with and tell me that, tell me yes, I'll call the other guy.
Then you go there.
But thinking about that across your organization, and now with CDRU Coach, being able to take this, as Angela was saying, when you think about what companies are focused on right now, it's like, how do I do more with less? Yes. And part of that is like understanding how to deploy your teams better, removing risks or things that are making us slow down. And by being able to have this at scale now, where you can start to see these group trends, yes, and issues that you need to address or watch out for versus an individual, I think is incredibly powerful. And that's been, as revealing as the insights were for me individually, the reason I've been so committed to this product is because of the impact that it has across teams and how incredible it is at dealing with those dynamics that could be pitfalls that really can be the difference between success and failure in a company.
Yep.
I think you've used that example of, I think, Enron, almost, and it's like, that's a very dramatic example of a company that was wildly corrupt and ultimately, went down in a blaze of fire, but they all had the same, everyone's a renegade, nobody's checking. Yeah. And, Emily, my partner, we always say we're very yin and yang, and it works beautifully because, I'm a cowgirl and I, sell the farm and not know how to do anything on the service delivery side. And we couldn't handle it. And, she stops and makes me take a beat. And it's again, and especially again, the operating from the risks. If everybody's guessing and it's an echo chamber, that's very dangerous for the ultimate results. And you can drive yourself off a cliff, Thelma and Louise style, real quick.
That's right. Yeah. No, the team, I love the individual coaching. Obviously, I've been doing this for over 25 years, but the team development really excites me. I mean, that's just like, that's bringing it home. So you go, develop self, know self better. And then how do I interact with others? How can we be, but you're right. And the other thing that I have found too, is we misjudge these risks. Somebody's detaching. We think they're not interested. We think they're stuck up, whatever. And it's not that at all. They're stressed and they kind of go into freeze mode, kind of thing. So yeah, I love it for the team. And as you said, the organizational trends. So we can look at the trends and the clusters of risks, let's say. And so if we know this whole group detaches too much, then you know how to develop them. Let's bring in some work on how do we communicate better versus what too many companies do is just throw money up against the wall, hoping it'll stick in terms of development. And it's like Teflon, only parts of it stick,
Well,
because
this is where, not to try to get into any political view, but in terms of DEI programs, this is where they have gone historically, been ineffective.
Right.
And what I think is so important about this type of evaluation and providing coaching, or that really it's the baseline is evaluating and understanding risks and behaviors and drivers, is because one, getting below that surface layer to understand how someone is operating is very important. Two, this common language is helping for inclusion and belonging, which is the foundation for everything related to these types of programs, because what it's ultimately about is ensuring that you're creating an environment where everybody is thriving. And so when I think about how, we've just really had ineffective programs implemented over the years because this baseline understanding of meeting people where they are, that step is missing.
Right.
And so now you're just creating solutions to problems that are the wrong ones or that don't exist or all of those things. And so, when, and you said a perfect example, and this from data, you have multiple books that you've written about even the differences between men and women. And these are proven statistical differences on how we respond to problems and how we respond to high stress situations. And many times, and you can say it better than me, but like my sort of simplified version is, women tend to get very analytical in those situations, whereas men tend to be more quick at making a decision, or like
aggressive. Let's go.
Making that bold leadership move. And so that can really be misinterpreted in the moment and put especially women in a position where they're not viewed as leaders, when in reality, they may be doing exactly what you need in that moment, which is pumping the brakes or doing a little bit more analysis. And if you know that about one another, you can actually embrace those changes and welcome that. Angela, your example with your partner is a great one. It's because of your self-awareness that you are inviting and happy for her coming in and having a differing view of you. If you didn't have that self-awareness, you might just look at her as a roadblock, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where I think when you become way more aware about your own tendencies and someone else's, embracing that difference and actually seeking it becomes what you are looking for, instead of trying to surround yourself with all of the same. And so the benefits to investing in these evaluations and the programs are far beyond development, leadership, team. I mean, it's all of the areas of team dynamics that you're getting a benefit from.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, I see it again, I come at it from the recruiting lens. So that initial, before they're even on your team, it's very easy, even like, again, to this person agrees with everything I say. I like this person, they're my type of person. Well, they might be your type of person because they're exactly like you, like the gentleman you were describing, Angie, who you call to check. But if calling to check again, and if this person is now going to be sitting as your peer, and they're not going to check you at all, then that's not the right person maybe you should be hiring here. And so it just identifies that before. And again, going back to especially, the younger you are, the earlier you are in your career, you don't know everything about yourself, and even your risks or your drivers or whatever, you can't identify them properly. So it just gives you a really great diagnostic tool and takes a lot of the guesswork out of it, beforehand. And again, some people can spend years and years and years thinking they've identified their own risks, and maybe they're 50% right, but again, they could have done it 10 years prior and had a lot smoother, road.
Right. And also too, adding to the DE&I problem. So what happened is we kind of doubled down investing more dollars, but we didn't improve the processes. Here's the problem. Even if you take it back to leadership in general, the studies still show that 50 to 75% of leaders are ineffective. Okay. There's two reasons for that. Number one, many of them are in the wrong jobs. So if we're self-aware and we know who we're promoting into the right jobs or hiring, that's number one. But number two, the risks are running amok. When they don't know what the risks are, these ineffective or bad behaviors are showing up all the time. And that's impacting those numbers. And that's kind of the business reason why. But even taking it to DE&I, what I found is, unless you identify, like we do, true talent, the strengths, the risks, the drivers, and get people into the right jobs, you just can't promote people for whatever reason because you want to be nice and promote them. Does that make sense? And even
or because someone is a great individual contributor.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
In a leadership role, and they're miserable. Exactly. And it's not, now you lose this person who is an incredible individual contributor because you've defined success as getting promoted into a leadership role. And then that, of course, puts them in an environment where all of their risks are coming up. It's just this like terrible catch-22. And usually you end up just losing that person and not being able to retain them. I've seen that so many times over the years where someone is just put in a role that is not good for them.
Right.
And, this is where I've come to you before and said, hey, I'm really seeing some behaviors here, and I'm recognizing that this person is in a stress situation. I really could use some help understanding what's going on. And in almost every case, there has been a mismatch.
Right.
I do this on day one at every place I go, but obviously it takes us some time. And usually there's a mismatch between that person and the role that they're in. And when you get them in a different role, they are like suddenly a top performer again.
Right.
You know, it's
so
such
true.
an amazing switch.
Every intervention I've ever been called in when somebody's failing, somebody's really struggling, every time they've been a bad fit in the role. And then that, like you said, Angie, creates more stress. And then all we're seeing is the risks. You know,
well, and then you go back to, you end up going to all of these like antiquated ways of addressing it, right? Like now you're like, oh, this person needs a coach.
Yeah.
So that they can become a better leader because they're not showing leadership skills. And it's like, no, you know, going back to what we said before, there are certain things about you that are just not, you can coach how you show up with those risks.
Right.
And you can, you know, sometimes find ways to fulfill your drivers if you're not getting them from work, actively make sure you're getting them in other areas. But like taking someone who is just not excited about nor skills to be in a leadership position and trying to force that is just a losing proposition. It's never going to work.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people I've seen in leadership, executive director positions who have under 10% in leadership energy. And you need at least a mid-range to even be, but because they got their PhD or triple masters or whatever, they're brilliant technically. They promote, like you said, they promote them and then they're miserable and everyone around them.
They're exhausted. Yeah.
You lose what's best about them, you know? So our thing is help people find their gifts, their true talent, what they're really good at, go with that. The other thing that's kind of, you might find interesting, we also push for job flexibility, job design. So let's say you have that good contributor, but they don't quite fit, but you've had them a while. So you didn't do an assessment at first, but you've had them. Can't you change the job description a little? Give them more of what they're good at and take away what they're terrible at and shift it to. So we need to get more flexible too, I think, in job design, if that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of a sidebar, but you know.
Well, but it's also, again, you know, when organizations look at career mapping or reorgs or anything like that, and especially, you know, now, and I'm completely empathetic that, you know, everybody wants to make more money. And so they see making, like, listen, I don't really love what this job might entail, but it's going to give me more money. And that's the only way I can make more money. But having that conversation, if you are, you know, the person that's potentially moving to that role and can identify that, or if you're the person on the other side saying, and can have that discussion and say, listen, you know, how can we make this work financially, but keep you doing this role where you're thriving and everything like that? Because just moving up, moving lateral, moving whatever for more money, but it really, again, stunts your happiness, stunts your performance. That happens all the time, but money is such a driver, especially right now, that people are pushing themselves. And to your point, Angie, as I identified as showing up with your representative and not your actual self. and that mask will fall off.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. So I do have one other question too. Just kind of, what is your impression? You've both tried CDR coach. You've actually been live coached, executive coaching, but in terms of going through, what does it feel like to have your avatar give you feedback or go through the action planning or any of that? And just impressions. I was just curious that you might talk about having.
I mean, from my perspective, being that I had gone through the coaching already, it was such an easy way to get a refresher.
Yeah.
Because I think, you know, especially as, you know, I went through it again, right, when I took over the CEO role. So I took over this, I was originally COO, took over as CEO just a little over a year ago. And there was a point where I went, okay, I need to go back and revisit my assessment and think about what I am going to approach differently in this role. You know, how do I want to approach it? Is there any risks that are going to be coming out? Like, how do I want to handle those? And so that's when I went through it again. You know, I had done it when it first came out, went through it again last year. And that's my sort of personal experience with it, is that it's a very easy and like on my own terms, in my own time. You know, it can be at night on the couch. Like, you know, it doesn't have to be during the day because I don't have to have a live coach available. And it just immediately brings back, you know, a familiarity and reminds me of like my key focus areas. I can kind of go through that again. And so that to me is like one aspect of it that we don't necessarily always talk about, but is the ability to reference it and go back and, rethink through those results in a new environment. Because even though those risks and drivers and strengths stay the same, the demands or the challenges in your role are going to change. And so you are going to have to be very intentional about how you handle those risks and drivers as you approach new challenges, new roles.
Great. That's a great application. As the follow-up review, it always stays open. So once someone takes it, they can go back anytime. So, and it's so helpful that way. I agree. Great. Angela, how about you?
And maybe it's just because I can't get out of like my sales brain. I always think like, what is the value prop of this, and how will it resonate? How will it go over in the market if I was trying to sell this out there? And I think the user-friendly applicability is fantastic. Again, I think it speaks to, and to not sound like a curmudgeon, but like the generation that doesn't necessarily want the coaching and wants the, feels less vulnerable with the avatar approach versus a live person, no matter how confidential it might be. I think it speaks to, again, the technology-driven organization that's had an iPhone their entire life, basically. Exactly. And I think it's very approachable, and that's the word that I would use, and it's easy to absorb, and scalable, I think of the applicability and the user ability for, people right out of the gate coming through college and, identifying high potentials that are a year within your organization, all the way up to, CEOs potentially. So again, it just takes something that was, so untouchable for 95% of any organization, no matter your size, and just makes it accessible. And so I think that's a huge value.
Angela, that's exactly, you said something that really resonates with me, in that because it's like data driven and it's completely like objective in the way that you're receiving that feedback from the avatar, it takes away that nuance that can sometimes exist. Like I've had coaches before early in my career where their style or their delivery just wasn't like a good fit. And then also it sometimes felt like very one size fits all feedback. And with this being such a data driven approach, it's such a and not to repeat myself, but the non-judgmental approach, it's so much easier to receive that feedback. And so now, to your point around accessibility, Angela, not even in terms of like, also, yes, getting it in front of many people in your organization instead of the elite top, but then also when you're going through it, the feedback being able to be received and delivered in a way that's like, easy to act on as well.
Great. Yeah, I had one gal, she's vice president in healthcare, and she said, I just liked it because I could take my time and think about if I wanted to pause, if I was hearing something new about the risks. She says, if you're with a live coach, you can't pause because they keep talking, with your avatar. If you just need to process it, she just felt she really liked that part of it,
But also from an organizational perspective, if I was a young employee, say like early 20s, and I knew that the EVP of whatever company I'm working with goes through the same process with an avatar, like it just like it brings the whole organization together and aligns you that, this is good for you and it's good for somebody at the very, very top. And it just makes, it evens out the playing field that I think is really being craved in the market, especially, warranted or not warranted by the youngest generation. I mean, again, they want to feel like they're not down here and you're up there. And so again, I think it bridges that gap nicely, that this is something that the whole organization gets behind and there's value in it for all of us. And now we're making it, accessible to, like I said, you guys.
Great. Yeah. And it creates that common language, the whole thing. The other thing that once we started researching and developing this, one that really struck me as we got into it is kind of what you said, Angela, is that, executive, and you said this earlier, Angie, executive coaching has always been for top executives, maybe the top 10% of the organization. And as I worked on it, and I'm thinking, but people need it more in their first 10% or 20% of their career, because you may plateau early because of your risks, yet you might be the most capable leader or thought leader or whatever it is, right? Designer. But because of your risks, and that's what we found with women, they're held back, and they shouldn't be, because they actually perform better in these roles, right? So I'm just saying, for me, that's what kind of gives me the excitement, is like, hey, let's help people early so they don't get stymied or they don't stall prematurely, and they really find where they need to go. So,
but it's also to analogize that to true monetary investing. I mean, the rich get richer, historically, with who has money in the stock market, the people that are able to have money in the stock market. And now there's these companies like Acorns and things like that, because truly, like, how you build any sort of wealth is, having these investments, and to invest in yourself or invest in your employees early on, like, that return is going to be massive, versus
right.
the people that are already at this level. And again, they might get richer in their performance and everything like that, but you're leaving everybody left, like, most of the company and most of the workforce is left behind.
Right.
And so again, it brings a lot of parity there that I think is really needed and really, again, like, craved by the market right now.
Excellent. Well, so I know our time is running out. Any closing comments? Thank you so much. This has been great. I could go on for a couple hours with you too. I know you're busy. I know you're too busy, but at the same time. So any, closing comments or thoughts? And again, I do want to thank you for being part of the advisory board. You guys are just tremendous. We appreciate you.
No, I mean, I'll just say, oh, sorry. I'll just say that I think what is, and Angela touched on this some, and I'll just reiterate it, is there is a lot happening with companies right now. And I think there can be a tendency to say, oh, well, training and development is like a luxury or something that is a nice to have, and I'm going to pull back on some of those activities. And what I think is, in a time where we need to be, once again, more focused on doing more with less. Not that it's only in the name of that, but it's about just getting the most out of everyone. And that comes with really having proper organization design and everything else. And now is the time where you can really look at your people strategy differently. And the whole purpose of my company now is like making data-driven decisions on what you're doing. And this is really bringing that to people strategy in a way where, by doing these assessments and making them available across the organization, you can be much more thoughtful and intentional with everything from team building, org design, recruiting, development, training, all of the above. And that's where I think our historical, like, traditional ways of doing things are just so ineffective.
Right.
And by like reimagining how you can do it, because you have these tools now available, is really bringing it into a much more impactful way to manage people.
Great. I agree. Thank you. Angela.
Yeah, I mean, again, look at the current climate, and people are repairing their houses and not going out and looking for new ones. And I think this is such a tool that helps you do that and, get the best ROI out of the people you have, get the people in the right seats if needed. Again, any that do need to come from the outside, make sure those really fit within your organization. And again, this is an easy and accessible and approachable tool that can fix, or can address a lot of those different criteria right away. So that's where I just totally see it as a very relevant thing in the market.
Well, great. Well, thank you both. This has been, like I said, it's been wonderful. I know you're so busy, so thanks for taking the time. And this will be available later. This will live on in our social media platforms and so forth. But thanks again, and I look forward to our next meeting.
Yes.
Right. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.